Mastering Your Frame: How to Stop Being Triggered and Live Authentically. Introduction. Have you ever been pierced by the unexpected barb of a casual remark, a comment so seemingly insignificant, yet it ignited a flush of heat through your very being? Perhaps a conversation, innocent in its inception, veered sharply, leaving you feeling cornered and misunderstood, or you found yourself uttering words you didn't intend, caught in a tempest of emotions beyond your immediate grasp. These moments, when we perceive ourselves unfairly judged or assailed, can render us vulnerable, as if our meticulously constructed sense of self has been fundamentally unsettled. It is akin to being caught in a sudden squall, leaving us to ponder why certain words or circumstances wield such potent dominion over our inner tranquility. What if there existed a means to navigate these tumultuous currents with greater equanimity, enhanced control, and a profounder understanding of your authentic self? The reason these encounters can feel so overwhelming is intrinsically linked to something we all possess, an invisible apparatus that functions as a unique lens through which we perceive the world. These are our frames. Conceive of them as your personal filters, meticulously crafted by every experience you have encountered, every conviction you hold about yourself and others, and every value that resonates deeply with you. Your frames are forged over time, from the lessons absorbed, the triumphs celebrated, and the wounds endured. They constitute the very bedrock upon which you construct your interpretation of unfolding events. For instance, if you have frequently been overlooked or dismissed, your frame may become acutely sensitive to any intimation of disrespect, prompting you to interpret even a neutral observation as a personal affront. Alternatively, if your frame is predominantly oriented towards the attainment of external accolades, a simple compliment might be perceived as a challenge, compelling you to strive for even greater achievements. Similarly, if you harbor a deep-seated dread of rejection, a friend's demanding schedule could be misconstrued as a personal repudiation, even if it is merely a reflection of their own obligations. These frames are in perpetual dialogue, much like two individuals attempting to inhabit a single perspective, and invariably, this leads to misinterpretations and discord. When an event transpires that conflicts with our established frame, particularly if it feels like a threat to our sense of identity or our fundamental beliefs, it can precipitate an automatic, often visceral, reaction. This is the essence of being triggered. It is as if a switch has been flipped, and suddenly, you are responding without the benefit of considered thought. You may have observed that disrespect often emanates from individuals who are themselves grappling with insecurity. They might endeavor to elevate themselves by diminishing you, thereby activating their own internal imperative to feel victorious in a given situation. When you are triggered by their words or actions, you inadvertently cede power to them. You become an unwitting participant in their dynamic, drawn into their framework of negativity, and this leaves you susceptible. Your emotional response serves as a signal that your frame lacks the fortitude you might desire. When your feelings surge with an intensity exceeding that of the other person, you are more prone to be ensnared by their narrative, losing your own grounding. It is akin to stepping into a meticulously prepared snare. Your emotional reaction is the mechanism that springs it shut, trapping you within. Beyond these interpersonal skirmishes, we are also subject to the influence of external frames. These encompass the expectations imposed by society, the prevailing norms of our culture, or the deeply ingrained beliefs inherited from our families. We often find ourselves striving to conform to these archetypes, driven by a fear of exclusion or a yearning for acceptance. This incessant outward gaze for validation can foster dissatisfaction and a pervasive sense that we are not inhabiting a life that is genuinely our own. When we are ensnared by these external frameworks, we are not living authentically. We are attempting to embody a persona that we believe we ought to be, rather than embracing the totality of who we genuinely are. The path toward reclaiming your inner peace and cultivating a life that resonates with your true self commences with a singular, yet profoundly impactful, step: awareness. It entails recognizing the existence of these frames, comprehending their operational mechanics, and discerning their influence on your responses. To master your frame is not to suppress your emotions, Rather, it is to cultivate the capacity to choose your response instead of being dictated by automatic reactions. When you can pause, observe the situation with detachment, and endeavor to understand the other person's frame, perhaps even recognizing their own vulnerabilities, you can respond with a sense of perspective, even a flicker of empathy, rather than succumbing to anger. This ability to zoom out is a potent form of reframing. True mastery is forged through dedicated inner cultivation, identifying your personal triggers, gently releasing past traumas, and constructing an unassailable internal frame of self-worth. This internal fortitude is your most formidable defense. Living authentically, guided by your own aspirations and values, erects an unshakable frame. It signifies defining your existence not by the expectations of others or by external metrics, but by the unerring compass of your own inner truth. In the ensuing chapters, we shall embark on a shared expedition. We will meticulously explore the intricate architecture of our frames, illuminating their formation and their pervasive impact on our daily experiences. You will uncover practical strategies to discern and disarm those who may seek to manipulate your frame. We will delve into techniques for reframing challenging circumstances, transforming moments of contention into fertile ground for growth. Most crucially, you will acquire the skills to cultivate a robust internal frame of self-worth and resilience, thereby paving the way for a more authentic, empowered, and less susceptible existence. Let us commence this exploration, and in doing so, unlock the immeasurable power that resides within you. Chapter 1. Understanding Triggers and Frames. 1. What are emotional triggers? Imagine a sensitive nerve ending within your being. A mere whisper of contact might send a sharp, unwelcome signal. Yet, a forceful pressure, even if objectively minor, can unleash an overwhelming surge of pain. Emotional triggers operate on a strikingly similar principle. They are the exquisitely sensitive nerve endings of our inner world, and when an external element brushes against them, we experience a potent, often agonizing, emotional reverberation. What precisely constitutes this potent touch that ignites such a reaction? It might be a specific phrase uttered, a particular inflection in a voice, a fleeting glance, a scenario that conjures an unwelcome echo, or even a memory that surfaces unbidden. These are the catalysts, the external occurrences. However, the pivotal, the truly illuminating insight is that the magnitude of our response is seldom dictated by the event itself. Rather, it is determined by what that event touches within us. The ingrained sensitivities, meticulously etched by time and experience. Consider this analogy. A scar upon your arm, when accidentally bumped, will throb with a pain far exceeding that of a similar impact on unblemished skin. The force of the bump remains constant, but the scar renders that point exquisitely vulnerable. Emotional triggers function as these internal scars. They are loci of hypersensitivity, regions where past encounters have left us raw, exposed, and susceptible to hurt. This intrinsic vulnerability explains the divergent reactions people exhibit to identical circumstances. One individual might receive a critical remark and dismiss it with a shrug, perhaps even with a wry smile. Another, subjected to the very same words, might be engulfed by a tidal wave of shame, anger, or profound sorrow, feeling personally assailed and wounded. The words were identical, but the internal terrain upon which they landed was vastly dissimilar. The latter individual's nerve ending was grazed, their trigger irrevocably pulled. So, what sculpts these sensitive zones, these internal hot buttons? The genesis lies deep within the tapestry of our personal histories. Our past experiences, particularly those imbued with emotional intensity or marked by adversity, exert a profound influence. Recall moments of profound hurt, abject embarrassment, pervasive neglect, or palpable threat. These junctures, especially if left unresolved or recurrent, can leave an indelible imprint. They can fundamentally shape our perceptions of ourselves, of others, and of the world at large. They can forge an almost unconscious programming, rendering us hypervigilant to specific categories of situations. For instance, an individual who endured a childhood where their pronouncements were consistently belittled or derided may develop a trigger associated with feeling unheard or invalidated. Later in life, within a professional setting, if their idea is overlooked or summarily dismissed, they might experience not mere disappointment, but an intense eruption of fury or desolation, as if transported back to that formative childhood experience, reliving the same powerlessness. The contemporary scenario might be considerably less dire than its progenitor, yet the trigger has irrevocably drawn them back into that ancient emotional vortex. This profound linkage to past experiences is foundational to comprehending triggers. It is the reason a seemingly minor incident can escalate into a perceived catastrophe. We are not merely reacting to the immediacy of the present, we are frequently responding to the spectral echoes of the past. Our minds, in an earnest, albeit often misguided, attempt at self-preservation, can overreact, mistaking a present, less perilous situation for a past threat. This is where our frames enter the equation, the unique lenses, meticulously crafted from our accumulated experiences, through which we apprehend reality. If our frame has been shaped by the contours of past hurts, it will inevitably exhibit a heightened sensitivity to stimuli that bear resemblance to those wounds. The concept of the wounded inner child within us is of paramount significance here. We all carry vestiges of our younger selves, complete with their unmet needs, their pervasive fears, and their inherent vulnerabilities. When we are triggered, it is frequently this nascent self that is reacting. That searing sensation of shame might be the lament of a child subjected to humiliation. That sudden surge of apprehension could be the tremor of a child experiencing perceived peril. That overwhelming sadness may well be the lament of a child grappling with abandonment. Acknowledging this does not denote weakness or immaturity. It signifies our shared humanity and the presence of areas within us that still yearn for solace and mending. When we can discern that our reaction emanates from this younger, more vulnerable facet of our being, it fosters a profound gentleness towards ourselves. It liberates us to respond with empathy rather than harsh self-recrimination. This perspective, while initially disempowering when we feel besieged, becomes remarkably empowering when we grasp that triggers are intrinsically internal. They are our sensitivities. This realization liberates us from the perceived tyranny of others' words or actions. It bestows upon us the agency to comprehend and recalibrate our own responses. Rather than viewing triggers as inherent flaws, we can begin to perceive them as invaluable indicators. They are akin to internal sentinels, sounding a clarion call that something within us demands our attention. They are compasses, orienting us towards the tender regions of our inner landscape, areas that may harbor unresolved pain or restrictive beliefs. When we approach our triggers with the spirit of inquiry, rather than dread or mortification, they transform into potent instruments of self-discovery and personal evolution. What fundamentally distinguishes a general negative reaction from a genuine trigger, and how does this discernment empower the individual? A general negative reaction might manifest as a fleeting wave of annoyance when another driver cuts you off in traffic. You might experience a brief flash of vexation, but it dissipates rapidly, allowing you to proceed. You recognize it as an inconvenience, perhaps a minor breach of etiquette, but it does not derail your entire day or plunge you into a vortex of negative emotion. A true trigger, however, operates on a different plane. It is characterized by a disproportionate emotional response, one that feels significantly more profound than the precipitating event warrants. That identical traffic incident might trigger an individual harboring a deep-seated dread of powerlessness or loss of control. Their reaction might transcend mere annoyance, erupting into intense fury, gnawing anxiety, or even outright panic. Their heart may pound, their palms may perspire, and their thoughts might become consumed by a sense of injustice, the perceived incompetence of the other driver, and the conviction that their entire day is now irrevocably ruined. The response is amplified, demonstrably irrational, and profoundly unsettling. This crucial distinction is empowering because it redirects our focus from the external occurrence to the internal mechanism. If we attribute the problem solely to the traffic incident, we are rendered powerless, as we cannot command the actions of other drivers. However, by recognizing that the intensity of our reaction stems from an internal trigger, we reclaim our agency. We can then pose the vital question: Why did this particular situation resonate so profoundly with me? What prior experience or deeply held belief might this be activating? This introspective inquiry marks the initial stride toward managing the trigger. It facilitates a transition from being a passive victim of external circumstances to becoming the conscious architect of our internal experience. We begin to apprehend that the capacity for self-soothing, for restoring our equilibrium, resides within us, independent of the actions of others. How does the concept of a frame, as introduced in the book's foundational premise, directly contribute to the genesis and activation of emotional triggers? Our frames represent the unique perspectives, the ingrained beliefs, and the anticipations that collectively shape our perception of and interaction with the world. They are meticulously constructed from our past experiences, our upbringing, our cultural milieu, and the sum total of our acquired knowledge. These frames function as sophisticated filters, imbuing everything we perceive with a particular hue. Now envision your frame as a pair of spectacles you habitually wear. If those lenses have been tinted by prior experiences of betrayal, they will invariably cast the world in a more suspicious light. If they have been colored by a history of inadequacy, they will render you more susceptible to any perceived criticism. When a situation arises, your frame immediately engages, interpreting it through the lens of its pre-existing tint. If the situation aligns with your frame's expectations, perhaps confirming a negative self-perception or a pessimistic outlook on the world, it can readily ignite a trigger. For instance, if your frame is predicated on the conviction that people invariably exploit me, then any instance where someone requests a favor might elicit a response of resentment or apprehension, even if the request is perfectly reasonable and the individual making it is entirely trustworthy. Your frame is interpreting the request through the prism of past exploitation, thereby generating a hypersensitive reaction. Conversely, if another individual endeavors to draw you into their frame, perhaps their frame is one of perceived superiority, and their aim is to diminish you, they might utter something deliberately designed to provoke offense. If your frame lacks sufficient resilience, or if it harbors pre-existing vulnerabilities that resonate with their attempt, you might find yourself absorbed into their frame. This is precisely the mechanism by which triggers operate. The external stimulus, often a subtle or not so subtle maneuver aimed at manipulation or provocation, finds a sympathetic resonance within your existing frame, thereby activating a pre-programmed emotional response. It is akin to a key finding its corresponding lock. The stimulus serves as the key, and the trigger represents the lock within your frame that it is capable of opening. Consequently, understanding and exerting control over our own frame emerges as the most direct pathway to managing our triggers. It entails recognizing the specific tint of our spectacles, comprehending the underlying reasons for that tint, and acquiring the skill to adjust them or even to remove them when circumstances permit. It is about cultivating a frame that is robust, self-aware, and impervious to manipulation by the frames of others. Comprehending what triggers are constitutes the indispensable initial step. However, to achieve true mastery, we must transcend the mere identification of these internal alarm systems. We must delve into the underlying architecture of the system that generates them, the intricate, often subconscious, frames through which we interpret the world. This imperative leads us directly to our subsequent exploration, the intrinsic nature of these frames themselves. 2. Recognizing disrespect and its impact. It is a curious phenomenon, is it not? How a mere handful of words, a particular inflection, or even a dismissive sidelong glance can send a tremor through us, leaving us diminished, incensed, or profoundly disquieted. We have all traversed that terrain. The moment when another's utterance or deed strikes us as amiss, like a stone cast into a placid lake, it sends ripples across our tranquility, disturbing our peace. We term this disrespect, a common yet frequently misconstrued facet of human commerce. Yet, here lies a crucial verity, one we must grasp from the outset. When an individual exhibits disrespect toward you, it is almost invariably not about you. It is not a genuine gauge of your merit, your intellect, or your character. Rather, it serves as a portal into their own inner cosmos, a realm frequently obscured by insecurity. Consider it thus. A person secure and confident in their own being seldom feels compelled to belittle others. They possess no need to triumph by causing another's defeat. Disrespect, in its myriad manifestations, often functions as a defensive stratagem, a clumsy endeavor by the other to bolster their own precarious sense of self. They may harbor feelings of inadequacy, of being overlooked, or of dread, and in that instant, they lash out, endeavoring to diminish you so that they might, for a fleeting instant, feel a touch more substantial. This is the essence of what we might term the negative winner effect. They seek a swift, artificial victory, a transient ego inflation, by positioning you as the presumed vanquished. This is not to condone their conduct, but to reframe our comprehension of it. When we apprehend that disrespect is frequently a projection of another's internal strife, it can begin to loosen its hold upon us. It is akin to witnessing a conjurer's illusion for what it truly is, a clever artifice, not genuine magic. The dominion they appear to exert over our emotions starts to wane when we grasp the mechanics underpinning it. Disrespect, however, does not always announce itself with a strident, overt insult. It is often far more insidious, like a slow-acting poison seeping into our well-being. These subtle forms can elude detection, and precisely because they lack blatant aggression, they can be even more pernicious. We might dismiss them, tell ourselves we are overreacting, or experience a vague disquietude without being able to articulate its source. Contemplate the backhanded compliment. It purports to be praise, yet harbors a hidden barb. Someone might remark, "My, that is interesting, you chose to wear that today." The word interesting hangs in the air, freighted with unspoken censure. Is it interesting in a favorable light, or in a manner suggesting it is peculiar, or even inappropriate? You are left in a state of conjecture, feeling a prickle of uncertainty about your own choices. Or imagine a colleague who habitually interrupts you during meetings. They may not be raising their voice, but their interjection conveys a clear message. What I have to impart holds greater significance than yours. This dismissive comportment, this persistent interruption, constitutes a form of disrespect that erodes our self-assurance and our sense of being heard. Then there is the unsolicited advice imbued with an undertone of condescension. An individual might offer, "Oh, you really ought to try doing it this way. It's so much simpler," implying that your current methodology is inefficient or that you falter due to a deficiency in capability. These are not outright assaults, but they chip away at our self-esteem, leaving us feeling less competent and less valued. These subtle barbs are often more damaging because they compel us to question our own perceptions. We might ponder, am I being overly sensitive? Did they truly intend that meaning? This is where the emotional snare of reactivity ensnares us. When confronted with disrespect, particularly its more subtle manifestations, our initial inclination is often to retaliate. We may experience a surge of indignation, a defensive impulse to justify ourselves, or a profound sense of hurt. And this is precisely what the purveyor of disrespect often unconsciously anticipates. Your emotional response serves as their validation. It confirms their endeavor to unsettle you, to destabilize your equilibrium. By becoming irate or defensive, you are effectively stepping onto their battleground, entering their arena of conflict and negativity. You are relinquishing to them the authority to dictate your emotional state, and in doing so, you forfeit your own agency. They have succeeded in drawing you into their world, where they experience a fleeting sensation of power. The key to dismantling this cycle resides in cultivating mental detachment, in learning to zoom out. Rather than immediately engaging with the disrespectful remark or action, pause and inhale. Mentally extricate yourself from the situation. Observe it as if you were viewing a scene unfold upon a cinema screen. Who is speaking? What are they saying or doing? What is their demeanor? And crucially, what might be transpiring within that individual? This act of zooming out allows you to transition from an emotionally charged, reactive state to one of more objective observation. It is akin to donning a pair of spectacles that enable you to perceive the situation with greater clarity, unclouded by immediate emotion. This alteration in perspective can also precipitate an unexpected internal metamorphosis, pity. When you zoom out and perceive the disrespecter's probable insecurity, their likely apprehension or inadequacy, you may begin to experience a sense of compassion or at least pity for them. This does not imply condoning their behavior, but understanding that they are likely acting from a place of pain or vulnerability can disarm your own anger. The wounded child within them is acting out, and recognizing this can temper your response. Instead of perceiving them as a malevolent aggressor, you might see them as someone grappling with their own difficulties. This compassionate observation directly counteracts the emotional trap of reactivity. When you can summon pity rather than rage, you cease to be a willing participant in their drama. You have not been dragged into their frame of conflict. You have maintained your own framework of serene observation and comprehension. The internal shift is profound, from feeling assailed and threatened to experiencing a sense of detachment and even empathy, which, in turn, diminishes the potency of the trigger. Ultimately, disrespectful interactions are frequently a subtle or not so subtle contest of frames. The disrespecter endeavors to impose their perspective, their perceived superiority, or their negative worldview upon you. They desire your acceptance of their distorted perception of reality, wherein they are somehow superior to you. By reacting emotionally, by becoming defensive or distressed, you permit your own frame, your frame of self-worth, your frame of dignity, your frame of authentic perception, to be supplanted or compromised. You are allowing their agenda to become your immediate reality. The objective, therefore, is to safeguard and preserve your own frame. This entails recognizing that their disrespect is an attempt to draw you into their frame, and consciously choosing not to comply. It is about steadfastly adhering to your own sense of self, your own values, and your own perception of reality, rather than being swayed by another's effort to diminish you. To elucidate this, let us consider a commonplace scenario. Envision Sarah at a family reunion. Her aunt, Brenda, who has perpetually been critical, surveys the dish Sarah has prepared and remarks, with a sigh, "Oh, Sarah, you've brought that casserole again. I thought you were endeavoring to eat more healthily this year." Sarah feels a surge of mortification and ire. Her immediate thought is, "How dare she? I dedicated hours to preparing this, and it is delectable." She feels the urge to retort, to defend her selection, to expound upon her dietary aspirations. This is the emotional trap. Brenda has successfully provoked Sarah, and Sarah is on the verge of being drawn into Brenda's frame, a frame wherein Sarah is judged, found wanting, and her efforts are disregarded. Now, imagine Sarah has been practicing the zoom-out technique. Instead of reacting instantaneously, she takes a slow, deliberate breath. She gazes at Brenda, not with animosity but with an observant eye. She notes Brenda's pursed lips, her slightly stooped shoulders. Sarah recalls Brenda has been navigating a challenging period concerning her own health and finances, and often employs criticism as a shield for her own anxieties. Sarah realizes Brenda's comment is not truly about the casserole or Sarah's diet. It pertains to Brenda's own internal disquiet, her own frame of worry and perceived deficiency. With this comprehension, Sarah's internal response undergoes a transformation. The anger begins to recede, supplanted by a flicker of pity. She has no need to defend her casserole. She has no necessity to prove anything to Brenda. She can maintain her own frame. She offers a gentle smile and states, "It's a recipe I've always cherished, Brenda, and I'm delighted to share it with everyone. I am striving to find a balance that suits me." Her tone is tranquil, her words are simple, yet her response is potent. She has eschewed engagement in conflict. She has not permitted Brenda's frame to dictate her emotions. She has acknowledged Brenda's remark without validating the disrespect, and she has resolutely held her ground, her own frame of self-acceptance and gentle boundaries intact. Brenda may not alter her demeanor immediately, but Sarah has successfully navigated the disrespectful interaction without losing herself. She has recognized the disrespect, understood its probable origin external to herself, and crucially, circumvented the emotional trap that would have ensnared her within Brenda's negative frame. The insidious character of subtle disrespect, much like Brenda's observation, lies in its capacity to sow seeds of doubt. It is not a direct accusation, but a suggestion that something is amiss. The phrase casserole again implies a lack of originality or effort. The reference to a diet suggests Sarah is failing at it. These are designed to prompt us to question our choices and our capabilities. If we are not vigilant, we can internalize these subtle barbs, allowing them to erode our confidence over time. They become integrated into our own internal monologue, a quiet whisper of self-recrimination that we may not even recognize as originating from an external source. When we are capable of zooming out and perceiving the disrespecter's insecurity, we can also begin to nurture a sense of empathy. This is not about excusing their conduct, but about comprehending the human condition. We all contend with our own struggles, our moments of uncertainty, our times when we lash out. Recognizing that the individual exhibiting disrespect is likely ensnared in their own internal tempest can transmute our reaction from one of personal affront to one of detached observation, perhaps even a quiet understanding of their suffering. This empathetic lens is a formidable instrument for preserving our own frame. It permits us to perceive their actions as a symptom of their own predicaments, rather than a direct assault upon our inherent worth. This capacity to identify disrespect for what it frequently is, an external projection of another's internal turmoil, and to grasp how our emotional reactions can draw us into their frame, constitutes the initial significant stride. It equips us to deflect the sting of negativity without becoming ensnared within it. But to truly master this skill, to transcend mere recognition of the problem and advance towards its active management, we must look inward. We must comprehend why we are so susceptible to these triggers in the first place, and how our own deeply ingrained frames set the stage for these encounters. The ensuing section will delve into the anatomy of these triggers, exploring their formation and their operation beneath the surface of our awareness, preparing us to consciously shape our own internal landscape. 3. The role of frames in perception. Consider a painting. To one observer, it is a masterpiece, alive with vibrant hues and profound meaning. To another, it might appear as mere chaos, a bewildering tableau devoid of discernible purpose. Yet, the artwork itself remains unaltered. The divergence lies solely in the unique vantage point from which each individual beholds it. This, in essence, is the domain of our frames. Envision these frames as an invisible pair of spectacles, habitually worn, often without our conscious awareness. They are meticulously crafted from the sum total of our experiences, our accumulated knowledge, and our deeply held convictions. These lenses profoundly shape our perception of the world, dictating how we interpret events unfolding around us and the emotional resonance they evoke. They function as the discerning filters through which all incoming information must pass before reaching the threshold of our conscious awareness. The architecture of our frames is a lifelong endeavor. From the indelible imprints of childhood, the wisdom imparted by our elders, the tapestry of friendships woven over time, the narratives absorbed from literature, and even the constant deluge of news, each element contributes to the singular set of lenses we ultimately don. If one's formative years were steeped in the admonition to conserve resources and the pervasive belief in scarcity, their frame might be one of profound lack. Presented with a sale, they may experience an almost visceral compulsion to purchase, not out of genuine need, but because their scarcity frame signals a fleeting opportunity, a chance to acquire before it vanishes into oblivion. Conversely, an individual raised within a framework of abundance, accustomed to a sense of inherent plenty, might view the identical sale as merely another option among many, rather than a critical juncture. The objective reality, the occurrence of a sale, remains constant, yet the perceived reality and the attendant emotional response diverges dramatically. This presents a pivotal insight. That which we apprehend as reality is frequently our perceived reality, meticulously sculpted by our frames. It explains why two individuals can witness the very same event, perhaps a friend arriving tardily for a meeting, and arrive at starkly contrasting interpretations. One whose frame prioritizes punctuality above all else and perhaps carries the scar tissue of past disappointments may interpret that lateness as a personal affront, a deliberate act of disrespect. Their frame immediately casts the friend as unreliable and inconsiderate. Their perceived reality is one of being wronged. The other individual, however, may possess a frame imbued with empathy and understanding. Perhaps they are privy to the friend's recent struggles, or perhaps their frame simply embraces the notion that human fallibility is inherent and life is prone to unforeseen circumstances. This person's frame refrains from leaping to conclusions of disrespect. Instead, they might ponder the possibility of an impediment, or simply accept it as a minor inconvenience. Their perceived reality is that of a friend experiencing a slight delay, devoid of any underlying malice. The objective event, the friend's tardiness, is identical, yet the subjective experience, the chasm between feeling disrespected and experiencing mild inconvenience, is vast. This is the very crucible of how frames influence our perception. They do not merely tint our vision, they actively dissect, assign significance, and even presage outcomes based on our pre-existing beliefs. If your frame dictates a fundamental distrust of others, you will exist in a perpetual state of heightened vigilance, scanning for indicators of deception in every exchange. Every ambiguous utterance, every hesitant glance, will be filtered through the prism of suspicion. Your perceived reality will become one of navigating a treacherous landscape of potential betrayal. This process of framing also serves as the direct conduit to what we term triggers. A trigger is not an arbitrary button that is randomly depressed. Rather, it is an external stimulus that intersects with a specific, often vulnerable, frame within us. When an event strikes a nerve, it is because it engages with a frame that carries substantial emotional weight or embodies a core tenet about ourselves or the world. This activated frame then dictates our emotional response. Consider an individual who, through a series of past experiences, has constructed a robust frame around the conviction of being not good enough. This frame functions as a hypersensitive antenna, perpetually intercepting signals that corroborate this belief. Upon receiving constructive criticism at work, their not good enough frame immediately engages. It fails to process the criticism as feedback for improvement. Instead, it interprets it as irrefutable evidence of their inherent inadequacy. The external stimulus, the criticism, ignites the internal frame, precipitating an intense emotional cascade of shame, anxiety, or defensiveness. The sheer intensity of this reaction is a potent indicator of the frame's ingrained depth and the degree to which it is being challenged or, paradoxically, reinforced by the situation. Conversely, imagine an individual whose frame is built upon the premise of continuous learning and growth. When confronted with the same constructive criticism, their frame processes it through a different lens. It perceives the criticism not as a judgment of their intrinsic worth, but as valuable data capable of fostering development. Their emotional response might encompass a fleeting sense of disappointment, but it is swiftly supplanted by a drive to comprehend and implement the feedback. The frame of growth is not triggered by criticism, it harnesses it as a catalyst. Our frames are akin to the operating system of our minds, functioning ceaselessly in the background, processing information and assigning meaning. When an event deviates from the operating system's expectations or directly challenges a fundamental program, the system flags it as an anomaly or a threat. This flagging is what we experience as an emotional trigger. The more deeply entrenched and potent the frame, the more pronounced the reaction will be when it is activated. It is also imperative to recognize that our frames do not exist in isolation. They engage in dynamic interplay with one another, and most certainly with the frames of those around us. In social contexts, this is where interactions can become particularly intricate and, at times, profoundly challenging. We are in a perpetual, often unconscious, state of attempting to persuade others to adopt our perspective, or conversely, resisting their efforts to draw us into their own. This marks the genesis of what we can term frame battles. Picture a disagreement with a friend. You may be operating from a frame centered on the need to be heard and validated, while your friend is driven by a frame focused on rapid problem resolution. As you persist in articulating your feelings and they repeatedly offer solutions, it can feel as though you are conversing in entirely different languages. This is not merely a divergence of opinion, it is a collision of interpretive systems. You endeavor to have them embrace your frame of emotional processing, while they seek to draw you into their frame of problem solving. Without an awareness of these interacting frames, it can manifest as feeling deliberately ignored or unhelpfully dismissed by the other person, fostering frustration and escalating emotional reactivity. This is precisely how emotional reactivity can render us susceptible to external manipulation. When we are so profoundly invested in our own frame, and so quick to react when it is challenged, we become predictable. An individual cognizant of this dynamic can intentionally employ words or actions known to activate your specific frame, thereby drawing you into their own framework of conflict or argument. They might leverage your frame of needing to be correct, or your frame of fearing rejection, to steer the discourse and dictate the outcome. By remaining unaware of our own frames and how they are being invoked, we inadvertently permit others to come and deem our perception and dictate our emotional experience. We become sucked into their frame, forfeiting our own sense of agency and authenticity. The profound beauty of understanding frames lies in its capacity to enable us to disengage from these interactions. Instead of succumbing to an immediate sense of being attacked or misunderstood, we can begin to perceive them as a sophisticated dance of divergent interpretive systems. We can acknowledge that the other person is not necessarily intent on causing harm, but is likely operating within their own deeply ingrained frames, just as we are. This realization does not excuse behavior that lacks respect, but it illuminates its origins and, more crucially, provides a pathway for managing our own responses. To further elucidate this concept, envision a scenario where a colleague, Sarah, consistently interrupts you during meetings. If your frame is one of "I deserve respect," and being interrupted is disrespectful, you will likely experience anger and resentment. You might interpret Sarah's actions as a deliberate attempt to undermine you. Your perceived reality is that Sarah is behaving rudely and dismissively. This frame, when activated by her interruptions, elicits a potent emotional trigger. Perhaps you become defensive, withdraw, or even confront her with anger. However, if you were to deliberately shift your frame, or at least consider Sarah's potential frames, the situation could be viewed through a dramatically different lens. What if Sarah's frame is one of "I need to be heard, and I often feel overlooked"? She might be interrupting not from a place of malice, but from a desperate need to articulate her point before the opportunity dissipates. Or perhaps her frame is one of efficiency, where she believes that interjecting to maintain conversational momentum is indicative of productivity. In these hypothetical scenarios, her perceived reality is that she is contributing effectively, not that she is being disrespectful. By recognizing these disparate frames, you can begin to discern that the disrespect you perceive is not necessarily a direct assault on your inherent worth, but rather a consequence of two interacting frames that are not harmoniously aligned. Your frame of requiring respect is clashing with her frame of needing to be heard or her frame of efficiency. Comprehending this does not magically cease the interruptions, but it fundamentally alters your internal experience. Instead of feeling personally assailed, you can approach the situation with a more strategic and less emotionally charged perspective. You can recognize that your trigger, the interruption, is activating your frame, and you possess the agency to choose your response rather than being swept away by the initial emotional surge. This is the very essence of mastering your frame. It is predicated on the understanding that the world does not simply happen to you, it unfolds through you, meticulously filtered by the lenses you wear. When you can identify these lenses, comprehend their genesis, and perceive how they are being activated by external events, you acquire an extraordinary power. You can begin to discern which frames serve your growth and which ones impede it. You can start to recognize that the disrespect or insult you perceive is often a reflection of the other person's internal frame, their own insecurities or perspectives, rather than an objective truth about your being. The winner effect, as we shall explore later, serves as a compelling illustration of how frames can be strategically employed to assert control. When an individual attempts to draw you into their frame, they are frequently seeking a sense of superiority or dominion. They desire you to perceive the situation through their eyes, to concur with their interpretation, as this validates their own frame and confers upon them the sensation of having won the interaction. If you react emotionally, if you become defensive or incensed, you are, in essence, confirming that they have successfully manipulated your frame. You have been drawn into their game, and they have achieved their objective. However, when you possess an understanding of frames, you can recognize this attempt for what it is. You can perceive the interaction not as a personal skirmish, but as a clash of interpretive systems. You can elect to remain within your own frame, or at least observe the exchange from a detached vantage point, rather than being inexorably pulled into the fray. This capacity for non-emotional reactivity is the linchpin for preserving your personal agency, your self-worth, and your authenticity. It is about navigating life according to your own values and perceptions, rather than being dictated by the frames of others or by the pervasive societal expectations that constantly strive to impose their own frameworks upon us. Therefore, the role of frames in shaping perception is profound. They are the architects of our subjective reality, the silent orchestrators of our emotional symphony, and the invisible battlegrounds upon which our sense of self is perpetually tested. By understanding that our perception is not a direct conduit to the world, but rather a meticulously constructed interpretation, we begin to unlock the door to managing our triggers and ultimately to living a life that is authentically our own. This is a journey of profound self-discovery, of peeling back the layers of ingrained beliefs to reveal the authentic self that resides beneath. 4. How frames shape communication. Communication, at its core, rarely unfolds as a simple conveyance of facts. It is more akin to a complex dance, or perhaps a subtle negotiation between distinct inner worlds. Each individual navigates reality through a unique constellation of lenses, shaped by deeply held beliefs, formative memories, ingrained expectations, and even the ephemeral currents of present emotion. These are our frames. When we engage with another, we are not merely broadcasting words into an indifferent ether. We are extending our frame, hoping for a receptive entry, or at least an understanding of our vantage point. More often than not, however, our frame encounters the friction of another's, and it is here that the true marvels, or indeed the profound entanglements of human connection begin. Consider this analogy. Envision a sunset of breathtaking beauty. You perceive a symphony of vibrant oranges, ethereal purples, and a sky ablaze with incandescent hues. This is your perceptual frame for that celestial spectacle. Now, imagine a companion standing beside you. Their frame might be clouded by the residue of a recent discord, or perhaps shadowed by anxieties about the approaching night. They may witness the same sunset, but interpret it as somber or even foreboding. The objective colors remain unchanged, yet the meaning and the emotional resonance it elicits are vastly divergent. This illustrates a fundamental truth of communication. It is a perpetual interplay of these personal frames. The intended message of one individual is invariably filtered through the unique interpretive schema of the recipient. This filtering process is so automatic, so deeply embedded, that it often escapes our conscious awareness. This phenomenon explains why identical words can elicit such disparate responses. A simple utterance such as, "You're being very loud," can be apprehended in a multitude of ways. An individual accustomed to constant censure might perceive it as an accusation, a judgment that their very being is excessive. A surge of defensiveness might ensue, their frame snapping shut, poised for self-protection. Conversely, someone naturally effusive, or perhaps merely unaware of their vocal amplitude, might interpret the same words as a straightforward observation, a neutral piece of feedback. Their frame might translate loud into animated or passionate. The words are identical, yet the interpretation and the subsequent emotional fallout reside in separate universes. Contemplate a compliment. You might remark to a colleague, "That was a really insightful point you made in the meeting." If their frame is one of robust confidence and collaborative spirit, they will likely embrace it as sincere appreciation, a boost to their morale. However, if their frame is permeated by profound insecurity, by a persistent feeling of inadequacy, they may distort the compliment into something entirely different. Their internal monologue might whisper, "They're just being polite," or more insidiously, "They're being sarcastic. They actually think I'm incompetent and are mocking me." Their frame, colored by past experiences of being overlooked or belittled, instinctively transmutes genuine praise into suspicion or derision. They have taken your well-intentioned message and, through the filter of their own frame, rendered it unrecognizable. This subjective interpretation is the fertile soil from which misunderstandings invariably sprout. We frequently operate under the assumption that clarity of expression and benevolent intent should guarantee comprehension. Yet, we overlook the fact that understanding is not a direct download of our thoughts. It is a construction meticulously built within the confines of one's own frame. When our frames collide, frustration, a sense of being unheard, and even the sting of perceived attack are common outcomes. We might exclaim, "How could they possibly interpret it that way? It's so obvious." But that obviousness is a product of our own frame. From the other person's perspective, their interpretation is equally valid, equally logical, rooted in their unique internal landscape. This is where the concept of baiting emerges, often at the heart of disrespectful behavior. At times, when an individual feels insecure or disempowered within their own frame, they may attempt to draw you into it. They might utter something provocative, something designed to elicit a potent emotional reaction. The purpose? To provoke anger, defensiveness, or discomposure, thereby hijacking your frame. They aim to induce a reaction that casts you in an unfavorable light, making you appear out of control. By compelling you to shift from a calm, rational frame to an emotional one, they achieve a sense of superiority, experiencing what is commonly termed the winner effect. They have, in essence, defeated you in a social exchange, not through logic or kindness, but by skillfully manipulating your emotional response and ensnaring you in their less than ideal frame. Consider someone who habitually interrupts. This behavior might stem not from inherent rudeness, but from a communication frame that prioritizes rapid speech and conversational dominance. When you attempt to speak and are cut off, they are, in effect, attempting to pull you into a frame of frustration or resignation. Their implicit message is, "My frame of speaking over others is more potent than your frame of desiring full self-expression." If you succumb to this bait, if you betray visible distress, you inadvertently reinforce their frame. You grant them the win by allowing their behavior to dictate your emotional state. This leads us to a critical juncture. Our emotional reactivity serves as a potent indicator of our frame's vulnerability. When we are incensed by disrespect, when a simple remark triggers a cascade of anger or profound hurt, it is a clear signal that our frame has been compromised. We have been successfully drawn into the other person's perspective, or at least into a reactive state they have helped orchestrate. It is akin to a fisherman casting a line. If you bite, you are hooked. Your intense emotional response is the hook, and the other person's agenda, or their desire for superiority, is the bait. This emotional reaction, while understandable, grants the instigator significant power over us. It reveals precisely which buttons to push, which words will destabilize us, and how to seize control of the interaction. The transcript's assertion, "If you have a stronger emotional reaction than me, it subcommunicates weaker frame and you get sucked in," is profoundly accurate. This is not an endorsement of stoicism or emotional detachment. It is an acknowledgement that intense, uncontrolled emotional outbursts in response to external stimuli often signify a loss of our internal equilibrium. We have permitted another's words or actions to dictate our inner state, thereby surrendering our agency. We have been sucked into their frame, where they might be operating from a position of aggression, insecurity, or a need to assert dominance. Imagine a scenario where someone makes a dismissive remark about your career choice. If your frame is one of unwavering confidence and self-validation, you might respond with serene equanimity, perhaps offering a brief explanation or simply acknowledging their opinion without internalizing it. However, if your frame is riddled with self-doubt, if you have perpetually questioned the wisdom of your choices, that dismissive comment can strike with devastating force. You might become defensive, enraged, or deeply wounded. This potent emotional reaction does not necessarily invalidate your career choice. It signifies that the comment successfully exploited a pre-existing vulnerability within your frame. The other person, perhaps unwittingly, has successfully baited you, and you have taken the bait, ceding power over your emotions and your sense of self-worth. This is precisely why the strategy of giving them nothing is so potent for preserving one's frame. When someone attempts to bait you, when they probe for a reaction, the most effective defense is to offer no ammunition. This does not imply rudeness or silence. It means responding in a manner that is emotionally neutral, factually concise, and devoid of any hooks for them to seize. If someone criticizes your work, rather than launching into an elaborate justification or an indignant defense, a simple, "I appreciate your feedback," or "I'll take that into consideration," can be remarkably disarming. You are refusing to engage with their attempts to draw you into a frame of conflict or defensiveness. You are providing them with no leverage, no emotional fuel for their fire. Visualize someone deliberately attempting to provoke you. They might pose pointed questions, utter passive-aggressive remarks, or endeavor to corner you into an argument. If you respond with a torrent of explanations, justifications, or emotional outbursts, you are essentially furnishing them with the instruments to dismantle your frame. You are providing them with details to twist, emotions to exploit, and a clear indication that you have been destabilized. Conversely, a simple, calm, and brief response, such as, "That's an interesting perspective," or even a polite, "I don't think we need to discuss this further right now," deprives them of that leverage. You are refusing to participate in their game, refusing to be drawn into their frame, and thereby safeguarding your own internal sanctuary. Let us examine how a personal experience can sculpt a frame that profoundly influences our interpretation of criticism. Consider an individual who, in childhood, was consistently overshadowed by a more gregarious sibling. Their parents, perhaps unintentionally, lavished more attention on the sibling's accomplishments, leaving the child with a lingering sense of being overlooked and unheard. This formative experience can forge a frame characterized by the belief, "I am not seen," or "my contributions are of lesser value." Years later, when this individual receives even mild criticism at work, their ingrained frame automatically activates. They do not merely hear a critique of their work, they perceive a reinforcement of that childhood sensation of inadequacy, of invisibility. The criticism, rather than serving as simple feedback on a task, transforms into a deeply personal assault on their fundamental sense of worth. Their frame interprets it through the lens of past neglect, rendering them far more reactive than the objective situation warrants. This frame renders them vulnerable, converting a potentially constructive interaction into a profoundly distressing one. Now, consider a situation where you believed you were communicating with utmost clarity, only for the other person's reaction to reveal a dramatically divergent interpretation. You might recall a moment when you attempted to establish a boundary with a friend. You stated, "I can't make it to your party on Saturday because I really need to rest." You felt you were being direct and honest, articulating your need for self-care. However, your friend responded with hurt and accusations, exclaiming, "So you're choosing rest over me? I thought we were close." In this instance, your frame was centered on prioritizing your well-being and establishing a healthy boundary. Your friend's frame, however, might have been rooted in profound insecurity and a fear of abandonment. Their interpretation was not about your need for rest, it was about their perceived lack of significance in your life. They heard your statement not as an affirmation of your needs, but as a repudiation of them. The clash occurred because your frame of self-care and their frame of personal validation were operating on entirely disparate wavelengths, precipitating a misunderstanding that felt like a personal affront to both parties. When someone endeavors to bait you into a specific emotional response, such as anger or defensiveness, subtle cues are often present. They might employ loaded language, adopt a condescending tone, or pose questions designed to place you on the defensive. For example, if someone remarks, "Are you sure you can handle this project? It seems a bit complex for you." The underlying intent, if they are baiting, is not genuine concern for the project's success. It is an attempt to ignite your insecurity, to make you feel inadequate, and to provoke a defensive reaction that diminishes your perceived capability. Nonverbal cues might include a smirk, a raised eyebrow, or a slight head tilt suggesting doubt. To consciously choose not to accept that bait, you must recognize these signals for what they are, an attempt to manipulate your frame. Instead of immediately defending yourself, you could calmly respond, "I'm confident I can manage it," or "I'm happy to discuss my plan for handling it." This response acknowledges their words, but refuses to engage with the underlying manipulative intent, thereby preserving your own frame of competence and self-assurance. Comprehending how our frames shape every interaction is the foundational imperative. However, to achieve true mastery of our communication, we must delve deeper and investigate the specific mechanisms by which these frames are constructed and how our own internal landscape renders us susceptible. Chapter 2. Living Authentically in a Pressured World. 1. The Power of Self-Awareness. Living authentically, in its most profound sense, transcends mere outward presentation. It is the unwavering commitment to embodying your innermost self, even in solitude. This requires a continuous, conscious effort to align your external actions with your internal convictions and beliefs. Yet, how can such alignment be achieved without a deep understanding of oneself? This is precisely where the transformative power of self-awareness emerges. It is the bedrock, the unassailable foundation upon which all genuine living is constructed. Without it, we are adrift, vulnerable to the capricious winds of external expectations and opinions. Consider your inner world as a unique and intricate landscape, sculpted by the sum of your experiences, knowledge, and cherished values. This internal terrain constitutes your personal frame, your singular perspective, your deeply held beliefs, and your expectations that color every interaction with the world. It is a construct built over time, layer upon sedimentary layer, each experience leaving its indelible mark. Self-awareness bestows upon you a detailed map of this territory, revealing its hidden valleys and soaring peaks, its labyrinthine paths, and expansive plains. It illuminates your core values, those fundamental principles that act as your compass, guiding your decisions with unwavering fidelity. These are the elements that genuinely matter, distinct from societal dictates. Whether it is compassion, integrity, creativity, or the pursuit of adventure, understanding these values empowers you to construct a life that honors them, rather than one built on the shifting sands of external validation. This profound introspection also cultivates an awareness of your personal non-negotiables, those boundaries and principles that you will steadfastly defend. These are the inviolable lines drawn in the sand, the crossing of which inflicts significant distress. They may pertain to how you expect to be treated, the limits of tolerance in your relationships, or the ethical standards you uphold in your professional life. Clarity on these matters imbues you with an inner fortitude, making you far less susceptible to compromise or capitulation under duress. Let us now revisit those moments that jolt us, the stimuli that evoke potent emotional responses, our triggers. We often perceive triggers as external irritations, events that happen to us. However, through the lens of self-awareness, they reveal themselves as far more significant. They are, in essence, windows, offering an invaluable glimpse into the very heart of our internal frame. When something elicits a strong reaction, it is not merely the situation itself that is at play. It is the collision of that situation with a core belief, an unmet need, or even a lingering past hurt, residing within your own frame. Consider Sarah, a gifted graphic designer who frequently found herself defensive and inadequate when her boss, Mark, offered critiques. While Mark's feedback was often direct, it was generally constructive. Yet, Sarah's stomach would tighten, her mind consumed by feelings of inadequacy. Initially, she attributed her distress to Mark's perceived harshness, to his triggering her insecurities. But through a process of dedicated self-awareness, Sarah began to examine her internal landscape. She recognized that her potent reaction stemmed not solely from Mark's tone, but from a deeply ingrained belief within her frame that her worth was inextricably linked to external approval, particularly from authority figures. This belief had its genesis in a childhood marked by scarcity of praise and an abundance of criticism. When Mark offered feedback, it was not simply about a design, it was perceived as a direct assault on her fundamental sense of value. This realization allowed Sarah to disentangle Mark's feedback from her own self-worth. She could acknowledge the sting, recognize the resurfacing of an old belief, and then consciously choose not to let it define her. She learned to view Mark's critiques as opportunities for improvement, rather than as confirmation of her perceived failures. This profound shift, born from self-awareness, transformed her from a reactive employee into a proactive professional, far more in command of her emotional responses. This is the essence of transitioning from being triggered to understanding the trigger. It involves pausing before reacting and posing the question, what is it about this situation that is eliciting such a strong feeling within me? What belief or need within my own frame is being touched? This simple yet potent act of inquiry transforms a potential moment of conflict into an avenue for profound self-discovery. It reveals that the power of a trigger resides not solely in the external event, but in the internal landscape. It illuminates. How, then, does this deep self-understanding fortify us against the pervasive influence of external frames? Envision your internal frame as a robust, meticulously constructed dwelling. It possesses solid foundations, resilient walls, and a clear architectural blueprint. Now, consider external frames' societal expectations, the opinions of peers, the pronouncements of media as individuals attempting to breach your sanctuary, perhaps even to rearrange your personal space. If your dwelling is poorly constructed, with fragile walls and an undefined design, it becomes exceedingly easy for these external forces to intrude, disrupt your equilibrium, and leave you feeling as though you inhabit someone else's existence. You might find yourself adopting their preferences, their priorities, their very worldview, because the integrity of your own space has not been adequately established. However, when you possess a profound understanding of your internal frame, when your values, beliefs, and non-negotiables are clearly delineated, your dwelling is unshakable. The external overtures may persist, the suggestions may continue to arrive, but they cannot easily penetrate your core. You can listen with politeness, you can consider their perspectives, but you can also discern with clarity how their proposals align or fail to align with the existing architecture of your own life. You can recognize when an individual attempts to draw you into their frame, perhaps to assert dominance or control that winner effect we previously discussed. Because you are intimately familiar with your own frame, you can perceive such attempts for what they are and consciously choose not to engage in their dynamics. You can stand firm within your own space, maintaining your unique perspective without the need for conflict or validation. This internal clarity is not merely a defensive posture, it is the genesis of unshakable inner strength and resilience. When you truly know and embrace yourself, imperfections included, you cultivate a profound sense of self-compassion. This is not an endorsement of poor behavior, but rather an acknowledgement of your shared humanity, your inherent vulnerabilities, and the inherent acceptability of these. This self-acceptance forms the bedrock of genuine self-worth. It signifies that your value is not contingent upon the accolades of others or the absence of criticism. You possess intrinsic worth simply by virtue of your being. This inner strength functions as a formidable shield. When you are secure within your own frame, you become less susceptible to the sting of criticism or the subtle machinations of those who may seek to erode your confidence. You can absorb feedback without it fracturing your sense of self. You can identify attempts to sow self-doubt for what they are often projections of the other person's own insecurities, rather than accurate assessments of your character or capabilities. This resilience empowers you to make difficult choices that resonate with your authentic self, even when those choices are unpopular or deviate from the norm. You can pursue a career path that ignites your passion, even if it is not the most financially lucrative. You can extricate yourself from a relationship that depletes you, even if it conforms to societal expectations. You can articulate your truth, even when it is uncomfortable, because your inner compass is calibrated to your own true north. Let us consider another illustration. David had always felt compelled to embody the strong, silent type. His family, his friends, and the prevailing societal narrative seemed to implicitly convey that men should suppress emotion, that vulnerability was a sign of weakness. This internal frame, meticulously constructed over years of unspoken messages, rendered him deeply uncomfortable expressing his feelings, even to his wife, Maria, who yearned for a more profound connection. When Maria gently inquired about his emotional state, David would often withdraw, a surge of anxiety overwhelming him. He interpreted her questions as criticism, as evidence that he was failing to meet the masculine ideal he felt obligated to uphold. He was, in essence, being triggered by her attempts at intimacy. However, David embarked on a journey of self-awareness. He began journaling, delving into the origins of his discomfort. He recognized that his strong, silent frame was not an authentic reflection of his true self, but a performance dictated by external pressures. He discovered that beneath the stoic exterior lay a deep reservoir of emotion, joy, sorrow, love, and yes, even fear. He learned that his core value was connection, a value that was being systematically starved by the frame he had inhabited. His non-negotiable became honesty in his relationships. This self-awareness enabled him to perceive Maria's inquiries not as attacks, but as invitations to connect, to share the richness of his inner world. He began tentatively at first to open up. He would articulate, "I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed today," or "I'm genuinely pleased about the success of that project." Each small act of sharing, each moment of aligning his external expression with his internal feeling, fortified his authentic frame. He realized that true strength lay not in the suppression of emotion, but in the courage to express it. His relationship with Maria deepened, and he experienced a profound sense of peace he had never before known. He was no longer performing, he was simply being. So, how does one commence this vital endeavor of self-awareness? It begins with a conscious decision to direct your attention inward. A practical and accessible step is the practice of mindfulness. This does not necessitate protracted meditation sessions. It can be as simple as dedicating a few moments each day to observe your thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations without judgment. What are you experiencing in this precise moment? What thoughts are traversing your mind? Simply observe, akin to a curious scientist examining a fascinating phenomenon. Another potent instrument is journaling. Allocate dedicated time to transcribe your thoughts and experiences. Pose probing questions to yourself. What situations consistently evoke a particular emotional response? What are the recurring themes in your life? What do I truly value? What are my aspirations and dreams, independent of external expectations? As you write, you begin to unearth the patterns, the beliefs, and the values that constitute your unique internal frame. You start to perceive the intricate connections between your past experiences and your present reactions. Reflecting on your triggers is also of immeasurable value. Instead of merely wishing a trigger would dissipate, inquire of yourself, when this occurs, what specific belief about myself or the world is being activated? Is it a fear of inadequacy? A fear of rejection? A need for control? A sense of injustice? For instance, if you consistently experience a surge of anger when someone interrupts you, it may not simply be a matter of politeness. It could indicate a deeper need to be heard, a feeling that your contributions are being dismissed, or a past experience where your voice was routinely silenced. Understanding this underlying layer transforms the trigger from a source of frustration into a guidepost, directing you toward an aspect of your frame that may require attention or validation. This process of self-awareness is not about attaining an idealized state of perfection. It is about cultivating clarity. It is about comprehending the intricate mechanisms of your own mind and heart, thereby enabling you to navigate the world with intention and integrity. When you possess this clarity, you gain the power to consciously select which external influences are permitted to shape you. You become the architect of your own life, rather than a passive recipient of others' blueprints. This internal clarity serves not only as your shield against manipulation, but also as your compass, guiding you toward decisions that resonate with your deepest self. The subsequent crucial step, therefore, is to translate this self-awareness into decisive action, learning to navigate the world with this newfound clarity and conviction. 2. Being true to yourself in social situations. Social arenas resemble elaborate soirees, each attendee a curator of their own distinct worldview, their unique frame. We enter these gatherings, and often, with an unconscious grace, we begin to absorb the ambient energies, the prevailing rhythms, and the unspoken expectations of those around us. This is an innate human impulse, a yearning for connection, for a sense of belonging. Consequently, we might find ourselves echoing the conversations, mirroring the laughter, or subtly adjusting our own perspectives to harmonize with the collective. This phenomenon is known as frame mirroring. It is akin to holding up a looking glass to your interlocutor, reflecting back a semblance of themselves. Consider this. You encounter a new circle of companions, all fervent devotees of an obscure musical ensemble you've never encountered. To integrate, you might feign familiarity with their oeuvre, adopt an air of knowing nods, or even embark upon a rapid immersion into their discography. Alternatively, imagine a professional engagement where the discourse gravitates towards career aspirations. You might discover yourself adopting a more ambitious, driven cadence, even if, beneath the surface, a sense of contentment or uncertainty about your trajectory prevails. This mirroring serves as a potent social lubricant, fostering rapport, cultivating a sense of shared understanding, and facilitating effortless navigation through interpersonal dynamics. It is a form of communication that transcends mere words, resonating in shared energy and perspective. Yet, this unconscious mirroring can also insidiously erode our authenticity. When we perpetually recalibrate our internal compass to align with our external environment, we risk losing sight of our intrinsic bearing. A subtle disquiet may begin to manifest, a quiet dissonance that signals a deviation from our core. This is the gentle prodding of your inner self, indicating that the frame you currently inhabit may not be authentically yours. It is akin to donning a borrowed garment, ill-fitting and uncomfortable, that, while functional, fails to embody your true essence. The internal signals that betray this erosion of authenticity, though subtle, are profound. You may observe a distinct absence of genuine enthusiasm when discussing topics that resonate with your peers. Perhaps you find yourself assenting to viewpoints you do not truly embrace, merely to circumvent discord. A palpable exhaustion may follow social interactions, not solely from the presence of others, but from the arduous task of maintaining an ill-fitting persona. A pang of envy or longing might surface when others recount their passions or triumphs, not from a lack of celebration, but from the stark contrast it highlights with your own present state. These are the hushed urgings of your authentic frame, seeking to reassert itself, imploring you to attend to that which genuinely stirs your soul. This perpetual interplay of frames lies at the very heart of navigating social landscapes. Individuals often harbor preconceived notions of how one ought to conduct oneself, what one should pursue, or what one should espouse. These expectations, emanating from friends, family, colleagues, or the broader societal milieu, are, in essence, attempts to subsume you into their frame to compel you to perceive the world or yourself through their particular lens. When these external frames assert themselves with insistence or judgment, the temptation to offer justifications, to elucidate your choices, or to defend your stance can be overwhelming. However, a profound realization awaits. Often, the most potent strategy for preserving your own frame and disarming intrusive inquiries or attempts to impose an external perspective is to offer minimal emotional and informational ammunition. This is the principle of giving them nothing. Imagine being confronted with questions like, "Why aren't you married yet?" Or "When are you going to secure a more stable job?" Your immediate inclination might be to embark on a detailed exposition of past relationships, career ambitions, or financial circumstances, feeling compelled to rationalize your life's unfolding narrative. Yet, by proffering an extended explanation, you inadvertently furnish your interlocutor with more material to scrutinize. You provide them with details they can dissect, question, or leverage to further impose their own frame of what constitutes a successful or conventional existence. This may elicit further counsel, comparisons, or thinly veiled or overtly stated judgments. You risk being drawn into an exhausting, protracted debate about your life choices, a discourse rarely culminating in a satisfying resolution. Instead, consider the quiet power of a simple, neutral response. When confronted with an intrusive query, a concise, unyielding statement that precludes further discourse can be remarkably effective. To the question, "Why aren't you married yet?" you might calmly articulate, "It's simply how things stand for me at present, or I find contentment in my current path." To "When are you going to get a more stable job?" a suitable reply might be, "I am presently prioritizing what feels most authentic to me," or "This is the direction I am pursuing." The crux lies in maintaining politeness while asserting firmness, offering just enough acknowledgement to register the question without providing the fuel for its continuation or for your subsumption into their frame. This approach is not about rudeness or dismissal. It is about safeguarding your inner sanctuary and your personal agency. By offering nothing, you deny others the opportunity to engage with you on their terms. You refuse to be drawn into a contest where their frame dominates. This tactic succeeds because it deprives them of any leverage. They cannot effectively challenge "It's simply how things stand for me" with the same vigor they might apply to a detailed account of your romantic history. By offering minimal engagement, you signal that your life choices are not subject to public scrutiny or external validation. You are, in essence, declaring, "This is my frame, and I will not permit its alteration." This leads us to a fundamental tenet of authentic living, the primacy of internal validation over external approval. A significant portion of our anxiety and reactivity in social settings stems from a profound yearning for the approbation of others or a fear of exclusion, the dreaded FOMO, or fear of missing out. When our self-worth is inextricably linked to the opinions of others, or to our perception of their possessions or endeavors, we become profoundly vulnerable. We are in a perpetual state of social reconnaissance, attempting to ascertain whether we measure up, whether our actions align with societal norms. This external orientation compels us to constantly seek outward confirmation. We ask, "What about you?" not from genuine curiosity, but as a means of comparison. We fret over what we might be missing if we decline that invitation, forego that opportunity, or eschew that trend. This persistent external focus renders us susceptible to the imposition of others' frames. If they perceive our quest for validation, they will often step in, consciously or unconsciously, to provide it, albeit on their own terms. They will dictate what we should desire, what we should pursue, and if we fail to comply, they may withdraw their approval, exacerbating our insecurity. The transition toward authenticity necessitates a redirection of our gaze inward. Instead of inquiring, "What about you?" we must cultivate the habit of asking, "What do I desire?" This is not an act of selfishness. It is vital for self-preservation and for living a genuine life. We cannot possess or experience everything. Life is a series of choices, and each choice entails affirming one path while foregoing countless others. Authenticity demands that these choices be made consciously, guided by our own values, desires, and aspirations, rather than being swayed by the perceived aspirations or accomplishments of others. As you begin to cultivate self-worth from within, as you learn to validate your own experiences and choices, the imperative for external approval diminishes. You recognize that while connection is invaluable, it should not come at the expense of your integrity. You understand that FOMO is often an illusion, a manufactured anxiety that propels you toward pursuits that may not ultimately yield happiness. True fulfillment arises from living in accordance with your own truth, not from accumulating external accolades or experiences. This internal validation forms the bedrock of a robust, authentic frame. When you are firmly grounded in your own sense of worth, you become less susceptible to the pressures and manipulations of others. Their attempts to draw you into their frame lose their potency because your own frame is so steadfast, so deeply rooted in your being. Indeed, authenticity itself can be construed as the most formidable frame of all. When you are genuinely connected to yourself, your values, your passions, your purpose, your presence naturally exudes an aura of confidence and integrity. This is not about arrogance or inflexibility, it is about being grounded. People are drawn to authenticity. They sense it. It acts as a beacon. When your internal frame is resilient and unwavering, it does not preclude growth or evolution. It signifies that your development and transformations are self-directed, originating from an internal wellspring rather than being dictated by external forces. Living authentically entails making choices that align with your true self, even when those choices diverge from societal expectations or peer pressure. It means articulating your truth even when it evokes discomfort. It involves establishing boundaries that safeguard your energy and well-being. This inner conviction engenders a powerful, unshakable frame that others perceive. It is not about obstinacy or an unwillingness to consider advice. It is about possessing a solid core that enables you to engage with external perspectives without succumbing to their influence. You can listen, you can learn, but ultimately, the decision resides with your authentic self. This robust frame functions as a natural bulwark. It absorbs external pressures without succumbing to destabilization. It allows you to engage with the world from a position of self-possession rather than from a place of need or apprehension. When you live authentically, your frame is so resilient that others often find themselves adapting to your frame rather than the reverse. They may not fully comprehend your choices, but they respect your conviction. They recognize that you are not easily swayed, and this respect can foster more genuine interactions. So, how does this translate into practical application? It commences with self-awareness. It necessitates pausing before reacting, checking in with your inner state. Is this feeling, this impulse to conform, truly mine? Or is it a response to another's frame? It involves practicing those simple, neutral responses when confronted with intrusive questions. It means consciously choosing to focus on what you desire and value, rather than engaging in constant self-comparison. It is about celebrating your own journey, your own progress, and your own unique trajectory. The analytical inquiry into how unconscious mirroring erodes authenticity and the internal cues that signal this erosion is paramount. It manifests in the subtle shifts of your posture upon entering a room, the modulation of your voice to match the prevailing tone, or the automatic affirmation that escapes your lips before a thought has been fully processed. These are the nascent warning signs. The internal cues are that faint hum of dissonance, the sensation of being slightly out of sync with oneself, that absence of genuine spark during certain conversations, or the subtle fatigue that descends after social engagements. These are not indicators of failure, but rather signals from your authentic self urging you to recenter and realign. And why is giving them nothing so psychologically efficacious? It is effective because it disrupts the pattern of manipulation. Many social interactions, particularly those laden with pressure or judgment, are predicated on a dynamic wherein one individual seeks to influence or control another by eliciting a specific emotional or informational response. When you withhold that response, you break the cycle. You deny them the hook to ensnare you in their narrative. Their frame, reliant on your engagement and reaction, loses its leverage. You cease to be an active participant in their attempts to define you or your life. You remain an observer of their frame, while firmly anchored within your own. It is a form of emotional self-defense that preserves your energy and your autonomy. By comprehending how to maintain our authentic frame amid social pressures, we forge a crucial foundation for self-worth. However, this internal resilience is not solely about deflecting external influences. It is also about actively shaping our own narrative and ensuring that our life choices, particularly within significant relationships, authentically reflect who we are. The subsequent section will delve into how this authentic framing applies to the intricate dynamics of friendships and romantic partnerships. 3. Overcoming societal expectations. The world vibrates with a symphony of expectations. They are whispered at family reunions, blared from advertisements, and endlessly scrolled through on social media feeds. These are not mere suggestions, they are potent, often invisible, architectures that dictate how life ought to unfold, how success is quantified, and the very essence of happiness. For many, these societal blueprints become so deeply embedded that they pass unnoticed, absorbed as the sole, indisputable tenets of existence. Consider the universally recognized milestones society seems to orchestrate: a specific career trajectory by one's late 20s, marriage and perhaps progeny by 30, a comfortable domicile and stable income by mid-30s. These are presented not as choices, but as essential markers on the path to a well-lived life. When your own journey diverges, or when these benchmarks feel distant, irrelevant, or even repellent, a subtle disquiet can emerge. This unease frequently arises from the friction between your internal, authentic framework forged from your unique experiences, values, and aspirations and the dominant external framework being projected. A pang of anxiety might surface when a well-intentioned relative inquires about your romantic life, or a wave of inadequacy might crest as a friend announces a promotion you never sought. This is your inner framework signaling a schism, a potential inflection point where external pressures collide with your inner truth. These societal constructs wield considerable influence because they are often presented as universal truths, validated by the apparent success and contentment of others. They weave a collective narrative that can feel overwhelming. Witnessing others seemingly fitting seamlessly into these prescribed molds prompts introspection. Why do I not? This is where the subtle undercurrent of the winner effect can seep in, not merely in overt confrontations, but in the silent competition of life's milestones. If you are not adhering to society's checklist, you may begin to feel like a loser, even if you are flourishing in ways that are profoundly personal and meaningful. The imperative to conform can be immense, compelling us to make choices that betray our true selves, simply to escape the discomfort of perceived inadequacy. When confronted with this pressure, our immediate impulse is often to explain ourselves. We seek to validate our decisions, to demonstrate that our paths, though divergent, are considered and legitimate. "Oh, I'm not married yet because I'm prioritizing my career," we might articulate. Or, "I'm choosing to travel now rather than buy a house because I value experiences over possessions." While these justifications stem from a desire for understanding and acceptance, they can paradoxically backfire. They can inadvertently furnish the interrogator with ammunition. Your explanation, however well-reasoned, can become an entry point for their own framework of judgment. Focusing on my career might be heard as selfish, or valuing experiences over possessions could be interpreted as irresponsible and short-sighted. Suddenly, your attempt at clarification has opened the door for unsolicited advice, criticism, or attempts to draw you more firmly into their societal orbit. "But you really should settle down," they might suggest, or "experiences are great, but you need to think about stability." This is precisely how external frameworks can subtly manipulate our emotional state. The more we strive to defend our choices through explanation, the more we empower others to question and critique them, fostering defensiveness, insecurity, and ultimately, a sense of being triggered. We become ensnared in their vision of a good or successful life, causing our own internal compass to falter. This is where a potent strategy emerges: the art of giving nothing. It seems counterintuitive, especially when feeling judged. The urge to defend our choices and prove our worth is strong. However, in navigating societal expectations and safeguarding your internal framework, offering nothing is often the most effective recourse. It means withholding the substance that enables others to engage in critical framing. This is not about rudeness or dismissal, but about strategic neutrality and non-committal responses. When confronted with societal expectations you are not meeting, the aim is to offer responses so brief and devoid of detail that they provide no leverage for further interrogation. Consider the quiet power of the "just because" response. When asked why you were not married, instead of launching into a detailed exposition of your priorities or past experiences, you might simply state "just because," or "it's just what feels right for me right now." These are concise, unelaborated statements that preclude further debate. Their purpose is not to persuade the other person of your reasoning, but to politely, yet firmly, conclude the line. of questioning. The elegance of just because lies in its unassailability. How can one argue against a feeling or a personal inclination? They cannot, without resorting to overt judgment, which then illuminates more about their own framework than yours. Another variation is repetitive neutrality. If persistence ensues, you can gently reiterate your neutral stance. As I said, it's just what feels right for me. Or I'm content with my current position. This can be disarming. The questioner, accustomed to eliciting a reaction or a detailed explanation, may grow frustrated by the lack of engagement and eventually shift their focus. It is akin to pushing against an unyielding wall. Eventually, the pushing ceases. The redirect is another valuable tactic. Once you have offered a brief, neutral response, you can skillfully pivot the conversation. But enough about me, how have things been with your new project? Or that's an interesting question. What are you most excited about in your life right now? This shifts the spotlight away from your choices and onto them or a neutral subject, effectively altering the interaction's frame. It is a way of signaling, I will not engage on this topic, so let us discuss something else. At times, the most effective deflection is to return the question with genuine curiosity. A reframing question can be potent. If asked why you have not yet had children, instead of detailing your reasons, you might inquire, that's an interesting question. What prompts you to ask? This is not confrontational, it is a gentle probe that can encourage the other person to reflect on their own motivations and expectations. Often, they may realize their query was rooted in their own assumptions or societal conditioning, allowing the conversation to evolve toward greater understanding. It can also reveal their own internal framework, offering insight into their perspective without requiring you to divulge vulnerable personal details. These techniques, just because repetitive neutrality, redirection, and reframing questions are not about secrecy or dishonesty. They are about safeguarding your internal framework and refusing to be drawn into an external one that does not serve you. They are about preserving your agency and preventing others from weaponizing societal expectations to manipulate your emotions or dictate your life's trajectory. By offering minimal information, you starve the interrogation of its fuel. You prevent your personal choices from becoming a battleground for external judgments. Ultimately, the most profound method for transcending societal expectations is by cultivating and living by your own authentic framework. This is not about contrarianism for its own sake, nor about outright rejection of all social norms. Many societal structures and expectations are beneficial and contribute to a cohesive community. Authenticity, in this context, is about conscious discernment. It involves understanding your deeply held values, your unique desires, and your personal definition of a fulfilling existence, and then making decisions that align with that internal compass. When your internal framework is robust, clear, and deeply rooted in your self-awareness, the external frameworks of societal expectation lose their potency. You become less susceptible to feeling triggered by others' expectations. You recognize that their expectations are a reflection of their own frameworks, their own experiences, and their own societal conditioning, not a definitive judgment on your worth or the validity of your life's journey. The anxiety of missing out on what others seem to possess diminishes, replaced by a quiet confidence in your own path. This groundedness arises from the understanding that your happiness and self-worth are not contingent on external validation, but on living in harmony with your truest self. Living authentically means that when inquiries arise about your career, your relationship status, or your life choices, your responses emanate from a place of inner certainty, not defensiveness. You might articulate, I am pursuing what feels most meaningful to me at this moment, or my life may appear different from what some might anticipate, and I am content with that. These statements are powerful not due to their elaboration, but because they originate from a space of self-acceptance and inner alignment. Your internal framework is your anchor, and when it is strong, external storms of expectation possess far less power to move you. Consider the narrative of Elias. For years, Elias bore the crushing weight of his family's expectation that he would enter the burgeoning tech industry. His father and elder brother were successful engineers, and the predetermined path was clear. Elias would follow suit. He studied computer science. He interned at a software firm, yet a profound unease settled within him. His mind constantly wandered, drawn to art galleries and the scent of oil paints. He felt like a failure, not only to his family but to himself. Every casual inquiry about his future in tech felt like a barb, a reminder of his perceived deviation. He offered weak smiles and vague assurances, feeling increasingly hollow. He was being drawn into his family's framework, and it was stifling his own. One evening, at a family dinner, his uncle, a jovial man who had always encouraged Elias's artistic inclinations, posed a direct question. "Elias, you seem a bit preoccupied when we discuss work. What is truly on your mind?" Elias's initial impulse was to deflect, to attribute his demeanor to fatigue. But something shifted. He met his uncle's gaze, recognizing genuine curiosity, not judgment. He chose a different response. Instead of explaining his departure from the tech mold, he simply stated, "My heart isn't in it. I feel more alive when I am creating art." His uncle did not press for details. He did not interject, "But art doesn't pay the bills." Instead, he nodded thoughtfully and remarked, "I understand. It takes courage to embark on that path. What kind of art captivates you?" This simple, open-ended question, devoid of expectation, completely altered the dynamic. Elias felt an overwhelming sense of relief. He began to speak, not defensively, but with a newfound clarity and purpose. He articulated his passion for sculpture, his desire to explore various mediums. His uncle listened, posed insightful questions, and shared anecdotes of artists he admired. By the conversation's end, Elias had not convinced his family to abandon their framework, but he had successfully navigated that interaction by presenting his authentic framework rather than an explanation for his failure to conform to theirs. He had offered nothing in terms of justification, yet everything in terms of his truth. This does not imply that external pressures vanish instantaneously. The world will continue to present its frameworks. However, by comprehending how these frameworks operate, by recognizing the ammunition they can provide, and by practicing the art of offering nothing in the face of intrusive inquiries, you begin to construct an unassailable internal bastion. Your own framework, built upon self-awareness and authenticity, becomes your guiding star. You learn to discern which external influences are beneficial and which are mere noise, designed to divert you from your own true north. This mastery is not about becoming impervious to influence, but about cultivating discernment, consciously selecting which frameworks to engage with and which to let pass by, thereby reclaiming your narrative and living a life that is unequivocally your own. By mastering the art of disengaging from the relentless pressure of external societal frameworks and cultivating our own authentic internal compass, we not only reclaim our agency but also lay the groundwork for genuine connection. However, navigating these pressures often involves confronting the fear of missing out on perceived opportunities or experiences that others are having, a pervasive modern anxiety that deserves its own dedicated exploration. 4. Managing FOMO in relationships. In a world that often feels like a curated highlight reel, a peculiar brand of anxiety can take root, particularly concerning those we hold dear. We witness seemingly flawless couples on sun-drenched vacations, friends immersed in vibrant social circles, or partners exchanging grand declarations of affection, and a quiet murmur begins within, "Am I falling short?" This knowing apprehension that others are experiencing something superior, more exhilarating, or more profound than ourselves is commonly known as FOMO, the fear of missing out. When it infiltrates our relationships, it wields a potent influence, subtly altering our perception of loved ones and the bonds we share. FOMO within relationships transcends a mere yearning to attend a different gathering. It signifies a deeper disquiet that can cast doubt upon the very bedrock of our connections. It constructs a distinctive frame through which we interpret our relationships. Envision this frame as a pair of spectacles that tints all that you perceive. When FOMO seizes hold, these lenses are imbued with the hues of comparison and uncertainty. Suddenly, Your own relationship, be it a romantic partnership, a cherished friendship, or even a familial tie, is perpetually measured against an imagined, idealized iteration glimpsed elsewhere. This external yardstick, often a meticulously composed snapshot of another's existence, becomes the definitive standard. It diverts your focus from the authentic warmth, unwavering support, or shared laughter present in your own reality, fixating it instead on what might be or what others possess. This shift in attention exemplifies how your frame can be swayed by external currents, rather than being anchored in your own intrinsic truth. Consider the ubiquitous perfectly posed photographs online, couples gazing soulfully at a twilight panorama, friends clinking glasses in an elegant eatery, or families embarking on an idyllic escape. These are undeniably beautiful moments, but they often remain precisely that moments, selectively chosen and artfully presented. Yet, our minds can readily interpret these fleeting glimpses as the entirety of another's lived experience. This relentless exposure to what appears as effortless perfection can forge and solidify a FOMO frame. It instills a sense that our own relationships, with their hushed evenings, occasional disagreements, and quotidian rhythms, are somehow deficient. This frame does not merely foster a desire for something different, it actively distorts our perception of what we already possess. Partner's quiet disposition, once appreciated as a sign of comfort and serenity, might now be perceived as a deficit of excitement when contrasted with the boisterous couples we observe. A friend's demanding schedule, once understood, could now feel like a personal slight, an indication that they are favoring other, presumably more thrilling, associations. This is how FOMO, fueled by external highlights, can erect a detrimental internal frame, leading us to devalue our own relationships. This leads us to a pivotal distinction, one that lies at the very core of authentic living. FOMO in relationships is characterized by the persistent inquiry, what about them? It is a ceaseless outward gaze, an unending interrogation of what others are doing, experiencing, or acquiring. What about you, Sarah? Are you enjoying your date more than I am? What about you, Mark? Is your friendship more profound than mine? This what about them mentality is propelled by a craving for external validation and a penchant for comparison. It implies that our sense of contentment, our feeling of being sufficient, is contingent upon how our relationships measure up against those of others. Authenticity, conversely, is guided by a different question: what do I want? This is an introspective approach, a focused exploration of our own needs, values, and aspirations. What do I truly seek from this romantic partnership? What kinds of friendships genuinely nourish my spirit? When FOMO commandeers our relational frame, we become so engrossed in asking what about them that we neglect to ask ourselves, what do I want? This external orientation prevents us from truly cherishing our present connections. We cannot fully immerse ourselves in the now, savor simple pleasures, or constructively navigate challenges when our minds are perpetually scanning the horizon for something better. This inability to commit or invest wholeheartedly can manifest in myriad ways: indecisiveness regarding a partner, a persistent dissatisfaction with friendships even when they are supportive, or a pervasive sense of being stuck, perpetually believing that the pinnacle of relational experience lies just beyond our grasp. The undeniable truth is that applying FOMO to relationships is an inherently futile pursuit. Life, by its very essence, is a tapestry woven with choices and compromises. We cannot partake in every conceivable relational dynamic, nor can we simultaneously embody every facet of a relationship. Imagine attempting to consume every dish at a magnificent banquet at once. It is an impossibility and would likely result in profound discomfort. Similarly, we cannot concurrently experience the exhilaration of a nascent romance, the deep solace of a decades-long friendship, the fervent intensity of a new love, and the quiet understanding of an enduring bond. Each relationship, each stage of a relationship, bestows unique gifts and demands distinct forms of attention and energy. When we permit FOMO to dictate our perspective, we succumb to a cycle of perpetual dissatisfaction. We might find ourselves in a loving, stable relationship, Yet if we are incessantly comparing it to the whirlwind romances depicted in films or disseminated across social media, we will inevitably feel a void. This precipitates a ceaseless quest for more, a restless discontent that impedes our capacity to fully commit to and cultivate the connections we possess. It is akin to holding a perfectly ripe apple in your hand, yet constantly scanning the orchard, convinced that the next tree harbors a sweeter, more succulent fruit. This can engender hesitation to invest fully, to embrace vulnerability, or to surmount the inevitable obstacles. Why expend effort mending a minor discord in your current friendship when you harbor the suspicion that you might be missing out on a more captivating, effortless connection elsewhere? This is the insidious effect of a FOMO frame on our relationships. Therefore, how do we begin to transition from this external comparison to internal prioritization, from the what about them of FOMO to the authentic what do I want of a life lived fully? It commences with deliberate intention, with the conscious reinforcement of our internal frame of self-worth and desire. The initial step involves introspection, a profound exploration of what genuinely resonates with you in your relationships. For a fleeting moment, set aside what your peers are doing or what societal norms deem ideal. Pose these questions to yourself. What are my fundamental needs in a romantic partnership? Do I value profound conversation, shared adventures, tranquil companionship, or intellectual engagement? In friendships, what kind of support is essential? Do I flourish with constant interaction, or do I gravitate towards fewer, more deeply cultivated connections? What are my non-negotiables? What familial relationships bring me peace and joy? Beyond merely identifying these needs, the imperative lies in actively prioritizing them. This entails recognizing that one cannot possess everything, but one can possess that which is most significant to you. This is where the cultivation of a robust internal frame becomes paramount. Rather than allowing the external world to dictate the appearance of your relationships, you construct a framework from within that defines their reality and your aspirations for them. When your own values and desires are clearly articulated, the external clamor of comparison begins to recede. You can then appreciate a quiet evening with your partner not as an absence of excitement, but as a treasured moment of connection that aligns with your yearning for peace and intimacy. You can value a friend's support not by the frequency of their calls, but by the depth and sincerity of your conversations when you do connect, because you prioritize genuine connection over constant contact. When insecurity or dissatisfaction whispers doubts, and the FOMO frame attempts to ensnare you once more in comparison, recall the power of your internal compass. The practical steps involve actively challenging those ephemeral thoughts of am I missing out? By redirecting your attention to your own needs. If you find yourself perusing social media and experiencing a pang of envy regarding someone's seemingly idyllic relationship, pause. Take a deep, cleansing breath. Then ask yourself, what do I desire from my relationships at this very moment? Perhaps you crave more quality time with your partner. Instead of dwelling on what you lack, resolve to orchestrate a date night. If you perceive a void in a friendship, rather than speculating if they favor other companions, reach out and propose a specific activity that you are confident you will both enjoy, focusing on the connection you do have and wish to nurture. This process is about the conscious selection of your internal frame. It is about acknowledging that while the experiences of others exist, they do not diminish the validity or the inherent beauty of your own. The crucial element is to construct an unyielding internal frame of self-worth and desire that remains impervious to external comparisons or the dread of missing out. When your sense of fulfillment emanates from within, from the knowledge and honoring of what you truly want and require, external pressures lose their dominion. You can then engage with your relationships from a vantage point of authenticity, presence, and genuine appreciation, rather than from one of anxiety and deficiency. By actively managing the pervasive fear of missing out within our relationships, we commence the construction of a resilient internal frame that champions our authentic desires. This newfound clarity and self-possession are not only indispensable for fostering genuine connections, but also serve as a formidable foundation for navigating the broader pressures of a world that ceaselessly attempts to prescribe how we should live, love, and connect. Conclusion: you have embarked on a profound journey, traversing the often turbulent waters of emotional reactivity to arrive at the calm, clear shores of authentic living. Our exploration began with the understanding that much of what destabilizes us, what leaves us feeling attacked or misunderstood, lies not in the intent of others, but in the interpretation of our own internal frame, our unique perspective, beliefs, and expectations. This book has served as your cartographer, offering a map to navigate the intricate landscape of your inner world and its interplay with the outer one. Recall the central tenet: your frame is your personal lens on reality, meticulously constructed from the mosaic of your past experiences. It dictates what you perceive, how you feel, and how you respond. When words or actions strike a discordant note, it is often because another's frame has collided with yours. At times, individuals consciously endeavor to ensnare you within their frame, particularly when their own sense of security is precarious. Their aim may be to assert dominance, to claim a fleeting victory in their own estimation. This is the essence of the winner effect, a desperate maneuver to prop up a faltering self-image by diminishing yours. Throughout these pages, we have dissected this dynamic. We have observed that when triggered, when emotions surge, it signals a challenge to our frame, a surrender of our internal state to external pressures. This emotional cascade is precisely the aperture through which others gain influence, steering us away from our authentic path and into their own perspective. It is akin to being a vessel adrift, tossed by capricious waves, devoid of agency. Yet, the profound revelation is that you are not destined to be a victim of these tempests. One of the most potent insights you have gained is the recognition that much of the disrespect we encounter originates from the other person's own vulnerabilities. When you can perceive that harsh words or dismissive attitudes stem from their internal struggles, from a fragile frame, the landscape shifts entirely. Instead of internalizing the perceived attack, you can approach the situation with a measure of compassion, perhaps even understanding. This is not an endorsement of their behavior, but a liberation from the burden of their negativity. It grants you the power to zoom out, to discern that their actions are a reflection of their inner turmoil, not a definitive judgment on your inherent worth. This realization acts as an impenetrable shield, deflecting the barbs of disrespect before they can wound your self-esteem. We have also illuminated how your frame functions as an internal compass, guiding you toward a life that is unequivocally yours. When your values, desires, and expectations are clearly defined, you possess an inner gyroscope that directs you toward authenticity. This stands in stark opposition to a life governed by the gnawing fear of missing out, FOMO, or the insatiable craving for external validation. With a robust frame aligned with your true self, your choices become intrinsically yours, unburdened by the expectations of others or the dictates of societal convention. This is the very essence of authentic living: to be the captain of your own vessel, charting your own uncompromised course. The mechanics of these frame battles are paramount to internalize. Your emotional reactivity is the primary conduit through which others can draw you into their frame. Visualize this. If someone attempts to engage you in a tug-of-war, but you refuse to grasp the rope, their efforts are futile. Similarly, by cultivating a state of calm and non-reactivity, you deny others the leverage required to pull you into their perspective. This is not about suppressing your emotions. It is about discerning the judicious moments and methods of their expression and, crucially, refusing to allow external provocations to dictate your internal equilibrium. The winner effect they seek is rendered impotent when you abstain from their game. This leads us to the potent strategy of giving them nothing. When confronted with intrusive inquiries, unsolicited counsel, or societal pressures that seek to impose an external frame upon you, the most effective defense is often to offer a minimal emotional or informational response. This is not an act of rudeness, but one of strategic neutrality. A simple, calm, and direct reply can effectively de-escalate unwanted lines of questioning and safeguard your personal boundaries without escalating conflict. It is a sophisticated way of communicating: I acknowledge your presence, but I am not inviting you into the sanctuary of my inner world. However, it is vital to remember that mastering your frame is not a singular achievement, but an ongoing practice. Life will perpetually present situations that test your resolve, introduce individuals with divergent frames, and resurrect dormant patterns. The key lies in cultivating a resilient frame, one that possesses the capacity to adapt and strengthen over time. This necessitates continuous inner work. It demands the active identification of your personal buttons, those triggers that tend to elicit a potent emotional response, and a dedicated effort to release the emotional charge associated with them. This is the bedrock upon which the ability to resist being easily sucked in is built. Regular self-reflection stands as your most invaluable instrument in this perpetual endeavor. Dedicate time to introspective inquiry. How are external influences subtly attempting to reorient your internal frame? Are your responses rooted in your core values, or are they driven by ingrained habit or pervasive fear? By discerning these subtle shifts, you can reaffirm your fundamental values and desires, ensuring that your frame remains an unswerving reflection of your authentic self. The ultimate transformation we have strived for is the pivot from a mindset dictated by FOMO to one that poses the profound question, what do I truly desire? This is the very heart of authentic living, emanating from a strong, internally anchored frame. Instead of seeking external directives on what you should be doing, wanting, or feeling, you turn your gaze inward. This conscious election and prioritization of your own needs and aspirations is what empowers you to inhabit a life that is not merely reactive, but deeply, intentionally yours. Living authentically, from a vantage point of profound self-knowledge and unwavering self-acceptance, constitutes the most formidable and unassailable frame one can possess. It renders you inherently impervious to external manipulation and judgment. The liberation that blossoms from living in harmonious alignment with your true self, unburdened by the clamor for external validation, or the specter of others' opinions, is nothing short of transcendent. It is a profound emancipation that allows you to engage with the world through a lens of unclouded clarity, unshakable confidence, and an immutable sense of self-worth. Therefore, proceed. You are the architect of your frame. You hold the blueprints.